Hey everyone, welcome into the Reverse Engineer podcast. We have a super special guest today, Nicolas de Porcel. He is one of the top guys coming up in the world of mastering. He's already within a few years of coming onto the scene, done stuff that most people haven't done. He's worked with major names, Roddy, Kendrick, Lamar, and one of the few Diamond certified mastering engineers in all the world. We're very lucky to have him today, to pick his brain, to have him enlighten us with his understanding and knowledge. Welcome in, man. How you doing?
Good, man. Thanks, Caleb. Glad to be here.
Usually, you start podcasts by asking someone about their past, but I think that's pretty well known for you. You grew up in the San Francisco area. If that's right. You came from a family, your father was a musician, as I understand it. He was someone you describe as someone who was brave and just kind of always put himself out there, and that shaped you as a musician.
He still is. He says he'll say some shit to my mom, and it'll make her mad. Like, hey, should I go take my guitar down to the park and start playing? And like, she's like very opposite of that. Like more introverted and like. I wouldn't say she's social, but she avoids people. Whereas my dad is very, just like what you're describing, very huge extrovert. Always just doesn't care if he looks stupid. Doesn't care if he sounds bad. He just goes out and does things with like this level of fearlessness that I admire now. I didn't understand it when I was a kid. It embarrassed me when he would do stuff like that, but I admire it now.
Yeah. It's that stuff that shapes you. And then you started at a pretty young age, I think 12 or 14 years old. You started making music, and then you started to get into EDM. You're classically trained on the piano as well, is that right?
Yeah. So my I do have a long background, and probably around 12, I started producing and started like getting. So when Fruity Loops came out, like on the Fruity Loops website, it started talking about these things called like MIDI controllers, and like every one that I was looking at had like knobs, and it didn't have like piano keys. And so like the ones that I was looking at back in whatever, the early 2000s, late 90s were just like knobs. And then I started to figure out like, oh, you could actually like play notes into the editor window if you had like a MIDI keyboard. And so I started getting into actually like playing a little bit of keyboard. And then my grandpa came along and he started like teaching me actually like how to play piano. And so like I got way into piano with him, and then I was like failing classes because I was like doing bad stuff when I was in high school, and so they allowed me to take these summer classes to like make up for the classes that I failed, and what I chose were piano and music theory. And so I started taking music theory like 16, 17 years old, just like producing and trying to like figure out how to like make new good sounding music. But yeah, it's from there, like I started producing for just like local Bay Area rappers, and I was just like I was in scenes where I was like half the age of people, and I was probably introduced to like a lot of like bad stuff that like led me into just led me down like a not so good path. And I eventually was able to I wasn't able, I got the opportunity, unlike a lot of the people that I was around, to like get clean and start like doing right, and pick up music again after getting like really involved in like the extracurricular side of the scene.
Yeah. It's interesting how a lot of success comes from those failures too. I know that it has for me, but it sounds like you're failing in high school and you're doing a lot of people could have been worried about that. I'm sure the parents weren't stoked about that, and then but it was through those failures and the summer school and the things that happened that kind of really defined a path for you later in life. So it's kind of interesting how that sometimes works.
In hindsight too, it wasn't like I was failing because I was incapable of doing the work. I was failing because it was like so boring and so
Yeah.
tedious that I was like my teachers were like, I would like turn in essays, and they would be like, I think you need to be in like AP English, and I would like go, I would like they would let me into AP English. They would like read all my essays, and then I would be in there, and I'd be like, this seems like an awful lot of work, like for the amount of stuff that I want to be doing outside of school. So I would go from like the AP class, like, and I would skip down to the lowest one, like the one that doesn't even like let you into college. Like I just did stuff like that was like my MO when I was a teenager. I would be like, oh, this amount of work seems, this is too much. Like I need to be out there with my friends making music and smoking weed or whatever I was doing that was like not good back then.
Right. Well, I think that's so fascinating. I do feel, and not to get too off topic, but I feel like it shows a great lack in the education system for a lot of people. I had a similar experience where I just was very bored, and I had even a brother-in-law he failed out of, didn't even graduate high school, failed out of everything, totally bored himself, and then like decided what he wanted to do and taught himself computer programming in 6 months, and now makes six figures and
Mm-hmm.
runs a team and is huge in that. And I think sometimes the education system fails.
Yeah, that's it.
Students
Like
coming up.
I had a handful of teachers who like understood what was going on and like took me under their wing and like really helped me during that time as well. So I think there are like a few good people. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
good people, but the system itself,
Yeah,
probably needs improvement.
100%. And then you did pretty well from what I could tell in EDM and releasing stuff as a producer and working with artists locally. But it wasn't till quite a few years later that you got into more of the mix and mastering stuff, and that's where your career really started to explode. And you've had some major opportunities. I think that's what people could read about you if they Googled your name. But what was a really transitional thing that most people wouldn't see from that whole process of growing up, the family that you had, the experiences you had in school, and what later became a thriving career as a mastering engineer? What was big that people might not understand from that?
So behind the scenes, and this is, I don't think I've shared, well, I've shared like this a little bit, but behind the scenes, like I started working at Target, like, like the retail company. And before I started working, I had this idea in my head that like I was above a minimum wage job. I'm like, I'm too good to be doing this. Like, meanwhile,
Right.
I was homeless like a couple years before. So I'm like, I have this like superiority and inferiority complex all going on at the same time. But I got this minimum wage job, and like, I would pay for my housing and for my food and all that stuff. And I lived in a house with four other dudes at the time. And the rest of my paycheck would be going to studio stuff. And so, like, even when I was like, in my early 20s, I'd started working. I'd obviously dropped out of college. I've dropped out of college multiple times.
Me too.
And so I was working and spending all my money on gear, but I was like promoting also at this job. I ended up promoting 7 times at that company into like higher and higher roles. And eventually I was like working distribution and doing things that were like heavily involved in technology and learning business techniques that kind of help shape, how I do my business today.
Mm,
But there was a ton of learning in industry and actual working for someone and having a boss that led me to where I am today. And actually, I have one boss who, like, he was like almost like one of those teachers that, like, put their arm around me when I was a kid. He saw like the potential I had. And there was at one point, they like pulled me into HR, into their office. And like, I was like, oh shit. Like, I was always taking risks and doing like, I was like always pushing the limits. So they like both pulled me into HR, and I thought I was going to get in trouble. And they ended up giving me like a 30% raise.
Wow.
And that raise changed my entire life. Like, if I had never got that raise, like, I would not be mastering. I would not be in this scene at all, because what it afforded me to do was to start like really buying up professional stuff. The other thing that it kind of forced me to do was, like, when they gave me that raise and then they promoted me one more time, is I started heavily like working on my business degree. And so I finished all my like general ed and my major, and there was just electives left by the time it was all said and done. And then I had done like these like what are they called? It's like it's not like post grad stuff, but it's like business education type stuff. And I started learning Lean and in Six Sigma. And because of like the raise and learning how to run a business and how to optimize a business for quality and efficiency, I was able to really like start and have a North Star of like, all right, this is the direction I'm going to go towards, which I think a lot of people like may not understand. When you're getting into business for yourself, it's highly ambiguous. Most people, I think, fail because they don't know what to do next, right? But for me personally, like, I have goals and targets, and like, yes, the mastering is important, but like, I'm not going to be able to make money off of mastering if I don't have the business down 100%.
This is so fascinating, because I think one of the major thing with artists, right, artist brains, is they're not always good at the technical business side of things. I remember touring across the country and come across bands that were so good out in the middle of nowhere that should be all over the charts and just incredible, right? And they'll never leave the small town. There's no business acumen there. And there's no smart. What was it though that Target saw in you? What element of you was it that they saw that got you that promotion?
I think it was probably my ability to learn, like, probably like self-efficacy, like to learn on my own. Like, I didn't have to have anyone breathing down my throat to be like, maybe I should open up a book on that. And so I would like be reading these, texts, like, not like fictional books. Like, I would be reading textbooks to like figure out how to do certain things. While my coworkers on Saturday nights were out partying and getting drunk at bars, like, I would be on Saturday night, like, I wonder how to achieve this. And I would be like reading, trying to figure that stuff out. And I think the other thing is just like honesty and accountability. Like, I feel like that goes such a long way when you're working with other people. When people can rely on you to show up and rely on you to tell the truth, sometimes the uncomfortable truth, and have those like really difficult conversations. That's something a lot of people avoid as well, like similar to avoiding public speaking. Like, I love public speaking. I'm not one of those like 99.9% of people. I get high off of it. And
me too.
If you know anything about me, I like getting high, and I don't do drugs anymore. So I am like not avoiding those situations.
I love that. Yeah, that's really, really valuable, I think, for people. I'm sure there was an element of work ethic in there that was important. Um,
Oh, yeah, I'll touch on this. So my dad actually talks about this a lot. When I was a teenager, like when I had my car was so nasty and so like messy, and like everything was not clean, and my life was so abstract. What's the part of the brain? Is that's the right part? That's like
yeah,
the abstract part.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and everything I was doing when I was producing was just like so like out of this world, and I'm like trying to like do things that no one has ever done, and I was so abstract. And I had no left brain skills at all. And so if you like see my house and my studio and my car these days, like everything is like spotless, and to the point where when my brother he gave a speech at my wedding, he was like living with me and my now wife at one point, and he was like, yeah, if I leave like a cup in the sink, like I have a text message with a picture of the cup in the sink, like, hey, what the hell is this? And I'm militant in how I like everything needs to be like clean and organized, but I wasn't like that. So like my brain like developed from right to left as I like grew um, older, and there is a lot of like self discipline in there, which led to eventually to work ethic. Like people trust that I'm going to get stuff back to them by whatever date, and like all of this stuff means like it's like a domino effect. Like if they don't get in these files when I tell them they're going to get in these files, like the music video can't come out, and other parts of the rollout are compromised, and like they can't show up to do this signing that's already like 4 weeks out. So like everything that I do, even though no one's managing me like to do these tasks, um, I have to have the self discipline to be like, all right, well, today's going to be an 18-hour day in the studio. Not because I want to. I'd rather be out jet skiing. Trust me, definitely would rather be out jet skiing on those days. But because people are relying on me to deliver for them. So
So
that's
the
where,
success started as you connected that right brain, the creative part of you, with this self-efficacy, this discipline, this work ethic, learning on your own, and the discipline to be self-motivated. All of that kind of led to you having a change. Target saw that, but it also was something that painted a picture for the rest of what you do.
yeah. And I mean, as more responsibility was layered into my life, like once I started having dependents, like my son was born and my wife quit her job, and there like I got another level of like, all right, I have to like, now it's not about just taking care of me, because I told you before, like I was homeless. Like I could be fine just with nothing, but when you have two other people that are depending on you to put food on the table and roofs over their head, like for me that like kind of lit a fire under my ass. And so I began to work a little bit harder, and then my daughter was born a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago or whatever. And now it's like, all right, we have another mouth to feed, and like now my son's life is getting more complex, where he's having to go to school every day, and we're having to pay for this school. And so like with the responsibilities, I feel like I've had to like kind of suit up and show up more. And then considering like now Ryan, he's doing work at Million Dollar Snare. He has a son that he needs to take care of. So like my business can't fail, because now we have like multiple, not only my family, but we have his family. We have Demetrius, we have Brendan, and the list goes on, right? Um, I have to. People are depending on me to
Yeah.
make things happen so that they can feed their families now, which is also
Well,
like
that's a character trait too, though, because a lot of people run from that responsibility sometimes. But you're leaning into it, right? It motivates. It seems to motivate something.
as long as they all know that I'd rather be jet skiing. But yeah, no, I do appreciate like having the opportunity to be able to have that responsibility, because earlier in my life, I there's no way I would have done any of this stuff. Like everything seems to have happened exactly when I was ready for it to happen. And it's almost like as soon as I was ready, I like faced those things.
I love everything you're saying. It coincides obviously with what we do at mastering.com and the reverse engineer, which is trying to connect that more left-brained part of engineers and producers to the right brain so that they can thrive, like what you're talking about. I think there's another element that I've heard about you. We've never met before today, but I do know people that know you. And I've learned over the years, one of the character traits that I've heard about you is that you're also very gracious with and communicative with the people that you work with. For example, you're on time. All the stuff that you're saying about you communicate really well. You show up, but you also are always really gracious about making sure you list everyone out in your credits and giving a lot of credit to other people. Has that been a part of where did that come from, and has that been a part of the success as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I don't know if we were talking about it before or after we started recording, but I think so. Like sometimes you'll see memes about the music industry, and it'll be like there was some person who said something like everyone in the music industry is like a gangster or a thief or something, and I wouldn't have it any other way or something like that. And like, yeah, that's cool to, to an extent. It's edgy. It's edgy. It's not cool. For me, like what I learned is like, I like honesty. Like I like being straightforward. I like giving credit where it's due and not necessarily like taking it all for myself. And what I noticed when I started like doing my marketing or my advertising, no, my marketing, because I was researching what other mastering houses and mastering engineers were doing. It was very much like, hey, this was mastered by me, and my name is like super big, and then it's like, and here's the artist, like in the lower corner. And I was like, well, hey, wait, like it's their song and it's like their art. Like, yes, it was engineered by you, but like, did you spend a year composing that and writing it? Like, for your name to be up here and for their name to be down here, like it's kind of like disproportionate to me. So, in order to like kind of right size things from our and to still like put our brand out, like that's how we eat, right? Like we have to be constantly engaging with potential clients, instead of being like, hey, I mastered this. It's like, hey, here's the team that worked on this, and we're like glad to be a part of that and use our platform to kind of help push the art rather than like help push ourselves. Because I think that's kind of an older generation's sales tactic. Like they used to be like, hey, buy this. And I don't really like authority, so I don't like telling people what to do. I just want them to like be like, hey, here's what we did. Like if you want to get something like this, like, like I just want it to be their idea. I don't want to ever be like, hey, come, work with me. I'm the guy. Like it doesn't feel real to me,
There's a lot of that though. Unfortunately, we were talking briefly before we started here just about our experience a bit in the industry, and that there's a bit of the cutthroat and the secretive nature of things, especially in mastering, where people aren't letting their secrets out and everyone's just kind of like, look at what I did. But you're taking a whole different approach, which I really appreciate, which is, hey, we're a community of people. These are all the people who are involved. This should be celebrated because it's music and it's great. I'm sure that's paid off for you in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that no one was doing it because it just seemed so obvious to me to be like not a narcissist.
But they're artists, though. Everyone's a narcissist, right?
I know, but engineers, like, I don't know, man. Like, I think, you can get caught up in like the nice clothes and nice things and, want to be a superstar, but like as an engineer, I don't know if that is ever going to be achievable because, we're not artists. Um,
Yeah.
and also like, I like being, you know, I like being in the background. Um, yes, I like public speaking, and I told you all that stuff, but I like to have the ability to, on a Sunday, not pick up my phone and be with my family, right? Like, which a
Yeah.
lot of artists can't do. Like, they have to be at Coachella on Sunday night doing whatever. Like, and even some engineers, live ones, right? But I think
Yeah.
there's an element for me of like, when I need privacy, I can get it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's really cool, man. It's wonderful to hear your approach to all this. That's very, very cool about the target thing and about how all that shaped you. I think that's just so valuable for people. Appreciate you just kind of talking about that. But at some point, you had a breakthrough, right? You had an opportunity come to you. How long ago was that? What was like the big break that happened with, you'd put this work ethic and everything behind it, and you positioned yourself to have success, but then success came. How did that happen for you?
Um, I mean, there was a couple records that. So the first one that was like major, that I like left my job at 10 o'clock at night to come do. I was like working like kind of an overnight shift. I was like managing this team of like 50 to 70 people, and I had a partner was helping in like the managerial tasks. But I got a call and it was like, hey, we're gonna go. Like, we need this record mastered right now. It's coming out at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and so I like left that job. I left my job. I told my partner, I was like, I gotta go. Like, this is like way too important. And I stayed up all night like mastering this mix with the mixing engineers. And it was the heart part for a Kendrick Lamar record that like prefaced Damn before that came out. And so I got the opportunity to work on that. And like, honestly, like, I didn't even know if I was like ready to do that, but like, I got the call to do it because no one else was awake, at 10 p.m. Right. Like, so like it was like, all right, well, shit, I'm just going to do this, and I did it and it came out. And I thought that was like, well, I was like, yeah, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. It's going to be, this is how it's going to go. But that's not what ended up happening. It took years for me to like continue to working on mastering for me to get another call where I was like, all right, like, we're going to try you to shoot out. Like, basically, like, there was these like 4 masters that were done on this little EP, and the artist just wants to hear like another set of masters. And so I had like done a set of masters for him, and I guess they were like AB-ing the masters from one engineer over to me, and they're like, oh yeah, like, these sound amazing, like, yeah, send these over, like, and that was my very first job. That was in 2019. That was my very first major label job. I remember it was the first time I was ever paid by a major label, and I was like all excited, and then I got another opportunity to from the same mixers to work on Summer Walker's album, and that album came out, and it was just like, it did so well. And I had this one friend who I used to like produce for, who's a rapper, and he's like, man, the streets, like, this album is going crazy in the streets. Like, I can't even go anywhere. He lives in Oakland. He's like, I can't even go anywhere without hearing this shit. And it like, the album did well, went platinum and all that, and had some good singles on there. But then when I did Roddy's album, the same thing kind of happened. It was like, all right, like, we want to hear some different masters, and they were like sending masters to all these different engineers or whatever. And I think I did like 10 songs, and 10 out of 10, it sounded like Roddy chose my masters. And I think that was the thing. That was like, because like, I'd had a few successes, but you can't like that's the other thing is like I thought like the one successful song or the one successful album would be like the tipping point, but I kind of needed to consistently like be doing good work. It was like the consistency that was the tipping point, not the actual like songs themselves. And so Roddy's album came out. We went number one for 4 weeks. The box went number one for 11 weeks. It's like one of the longest number ones in history. It was like one of 26 songs that had like gone number one for that long. And then it went diamond. This was like after the fact, but like once that started happening and I started getting a track record, then I started to like attract these other jobs and these other engineers, and they would do shootouts, and like that to me was like where I think I got to learn the most. We talked before. It has not been easy. Like people see the like you were saying, my rise to prominence, like it's not been an easy rise. Like I lost so many jobs to shootouts the same way that other engineers were losing jobs to me to those shootouts, right? Like when I like came in. But what I learned was I would like listen to the song when it came out because like I want to, honestly assess like what those people were liking about those other renditions of the mix, right? Because like that's what like when you send a mix out to 2 different mastering engineers, like you're getting back 2 renditions, right? And so I would like just do my homework, like, all right, what did they like? And I would really listen. I'd listen in the studio, and I would A/B to mine, and I'd be like, okay, they like this, they like this. As that was happening, I've always been experimenting with new technology, but I was seeing like how far I could push the tech that I have. And so I'd be swapping out limiters. I'd be swapping out like all of my EQs. I'd be like A/Bing all of my EQs. Like which one really sounds better with like the same Q, with the same frequency, with the same boost, right? Like, and I would just be A/Bing everything. And so I got to this point where instead of losing jobs, what I would do was I would do a master, and then I would try to like beat myself, and I would like do this over and over and over again. And there was this one song that I like had a feeling they were going to like send out to other people. I'm not going to tell who it was or like what the name of the song was, but I worked on it probably for like 16 hours, and like in mastering, that's insane. Like I never work on a song for 16 hours. I think that was probably the last time I ever really put in that much work on one song, but I needed to do that because I needed to see like what was possible. And I was like working for 16 hours on it. Like I would take breaks. I'd go do something, and then I'd go listen to it in the car, and I would listen to it on the headphones, and I would listen to it, on like a Bluetooth speaker. And eventually I got to the point where I was like, this cannot be beat. It's perfect. And what ended up happening was they sent it out to another mastering engineer. And so it was a very well-known, like very good mastering engineer. And that person could not beat the master that I sent back because I was competing for so long with myself that it was just like, there was no fucking way that anyone was going to be able to like this was the best possible outcome for this mix. And I really believe that it went from like this subjective, like, oh, maybe I like this master better. It went from like this subjective thing to like objectively, like anyone could listen to this and be like, wow, that is a fucking damn good master. And like that song ended up going like, super multi-platinum as well. But it's really interesting. It's been really interesting for me to see like, okay, well, and it comes back to like the self-discipline thing. Like if someone doesn't like what they get back, they're faced with a decision, and it's the same decision I was faced with when I was a producer sending my stuff to get mastered. For me, it was like, well, I can't really like, I spent all my money on mastering, so I can't really send this to anyone else. And I'm like all done getting revisions back from this person because they won't, like, they're charging me for everything else. So what I ended up having to do was master my own stuff. If I wanted to have it sound better than what I was getting back. And so what other people are going to do is they're going to either A, not release it, B, send it to someone else, or C, do it themselves and release it. And like, in order to avoid all of those things, which I had been running into as a novice mastering engineer, I had to learn to like figure out how to compete with myself. And so these days, as I'm teaching other engineers, specifically Demetrius, when Demetrius first came on, I'd come in and I would cross my arms and I'd sit in almost the same seat that I'm sitting right here, and I'd listen to his master, and I would duplicate the mix down into another channel, and I would throw on an L2, like a FabFilter Pro L2, and I'd bring the gain up, and I would A/B my L2. I'd like change the attack and the release, and I'd A/B him, and I'd be like, man, my L2 sounds better than your master. What happened here?
Wow.
And that was like a really good way for him to learn, because it was a really good way for me to learn too. Like, I do the same thing when I get stuff. I'm like, all right, they didn't send me a ref, so I'm going to make like a ref in how I think mixers are making refs right now. And so I make myself a little ref, and sometimes I'm like, wow, this sounds like better than the analog thing that I did. And I'll like start digging deeper into like just an in the box master if it gets to that point. But I'm always competing with myself. So a lot of the time when I'm getting hired, I'm doing more than one version before I send it back to someone else. And even if it's just quick, like, I'm seeing what is possible, and then I'll really like dive in deep on the version that I think is best. And I'll do really extreme detail work to make sure that it's like as perfect as it can be without ruining the imperfections of the art.
There's several. It's so fascinating. I'm so inspired by what you're saying. There's several things I want to unpack here. I mean, going back to what you were talking about before, I think a lot of people, I think people feel like if they got the one chance to do the one record, that it would blow their career up and they wouldn't have to worry about anything else. I think people think that way.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
not my experience
at all.
No.
Yeah, no, I don't, and I don't think it really is. Which I think in some way goes to show that you can't fake this. You actually have to learn the good business techniques. You have to learn the acumen. You have to push yourself. You have to be really prepared. And even when there are doors of opportunity to walk through, you have to be ready to walk through them. And then even when those are done, there's nowhere to hang your hat. You still have to keep pushing. You still have to keep fighting. All the fundamentals that you learned are still going to matter, because it's not going to be for probably a lot longer than that before you actually can get, and you'll never get comfortable really, but you can get more comfortable. At least you can have a realistic career, but it's not going to just come through getting lucky or knowing the right person. It's actually going to have to boil down to the foundational, fundamental stuff.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that like, I first thought like, all right, the success of the song is like really dependent on who's mixing it, because like for the first few of the plaques that I gotten were like, it was the main guys that I usually work with, but then once other records started like becoming impactful from like lesser known artists and lesser known mixing engineers, I was like, hey, maybe like I'm helping to like catapult these records into like the competitive stratosphere where they're able to stand up to what else is out there that's currently being played. And so for me, that was a big realization of like, I had one boss tell me a long time ago, like when I was like working actually in the Target stores, they were like, hey, I'm the reason you got promoted. And then after he told me that, like I went on to promote like 4 other times with people that like, weren't him. Right. And like but for a little bit, like I really truly believe, like he got this into my head that it was him who promoted me. Um, and that's similar to like what I experienced when I was like working on music, is like, and no one told me like, hey, you're the reason that like I'm the reason these records are doing well. But it was something I had to get out of my head, like my own belief, where I was like, oh, hey, maybe, I could help these records do well too, Um, it wasn't just this one person. Like I have, like, even though I don't have, I have a fleeting glimpse of control in most situations. Um, but that doesn't mean that I don't have influence. So I could positively influence the outcome of the release of a record. And I learned that, it was possible. And the more I like believed it, the more it's like, oh, well, no one knew about this artist yesterday, and now everyone knows this artist. Oh, and now they're nominated for a Grammy. So it's like,
Yeah, in our program, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome. Sounds like that's what you were competing with in some of those moments, but it was the work you put into it to be confident in those moments, to push back on yourself and take ownership of what you had control over, the fleeting glimpse, even as it were, to make things better.
yeah. And there's almost like when I get sent a record by someone that's like, very, very famous, like sometimes I'll think about it too much and I'll be like, oh, it has to be, it has to be like this, Um, whereas like if I don't know the artist, I'm way more willing to like, or not anymore. Now I just do whatever the fuck I want. But I used to be like way more willing to take a risk with like an unknown artist, and like some of those risks were like the best risks I ever took, because I'm experiment. Like this is, this is a technology job. Like I'm experimenting with new technology. I'm pushing the limits. Like all these DSPs are constantly moving their targets for how to like, for what specs they need delivered and how they're normalizing and how the audio is being transcoded. Like I have to keep experimenting, so I keep like, I was more willing to experiment on the lesser known artists. But now just like, it doesn't matter what is sent to me from where or who the artist is. Like I'm going to do whatever it takes, to hear it how I want to hear it and to get it to like translate how I think it should translate. But yeah,
It's not lost on me, though, that a lot of the people who might be listening to this podcast aren't there yet. They haven't had the chance to, have their first big one, or to keep pushing and keep refining to that level. And it's obviously a journey that they'll be on. There was something, that we shouldn't skip over, which was that you somehow put yourself in a position to be working with mixers who were working with big people. What was it that you were doing on the business side to know the right people to get the opportunity? Were you reaching out? Were you just lucky? How did that come to pass?
I think we already talked about it. Like I was just giving credit to people on social media. And you ever heard of that, like 6 degrees of separation? Like you're basically connected to everyone in the world by like 6
Right.
people, Well, like that's super amplified on social media because you tag someone who makes something in a post, they repost it. Everyone who knows them that mixes sees it. And I think a lot of the early business we had was like, oh, people are like, oh, who is this? Like, like this is the new thing in town. Like, let's try this out. And it went from like the new thing in town to like, oh, this is like sonically superior to what I've been getting back prior to working with this person. So like at first it's like, word of mouth, people see it, they want to work with us. But then once they like hear a superior product, that's when they kind of like stick around. And so like my goal, like this year, especially this year, I got really busy last year, like so busy that it was hard to keep up with all the work. And so what I've been trying to do is not necessarily like, well, I guess, yeah, be a little bit more selective, but we're doing it in a way to where we can still do volume. So everything that I'm getting, everything that's getting sent to me, like I am like 100%. Like, like if I can't do the work in that day, like I'm dedicated to being like 100% to every song instead of being like, yes, we'll get it all in, you know. So I'll have to like push deadlines back. So if you look at all of our like everything's like posted online, like on engineers, you can see that we're like booked back 11 days. Like we're not taking projects for 11 days out, or maybe it's even further. Um, but that is in order to like give 100% to every single song I get, no matter who sends it. Right? Like if they're gonna pay me the my fee to master, like they're getting 100% of me, and 100, like I'm not willing to compromise. Like I'm trying to do like I told you before, I'm trying to do 2 renditions of the master for every single song, even if it's a song I don't like. Because if I can get the song to all right, now it sounds like okay, you know, like it may not be the best song in the world, but like it sounds like decent enough to come out. Like if I can get it to that place, sometimes that's like requires me to put in way more effort than like a song that's like amazing, that's mixed perfectly. So I'm really trying to like make the brand really about like this super, super high quality product. I'm not giving anything to my assistants. Like they're not mastering anything. Like I'm doing the mains. They will run the alts. Like they're getting their own work. They're getting their own jobs, and like with their jobs too. Like even though my name is not on it, I'm still listening back, and I'm saying like this. We need to push it harder. We need to go. We need to see if this can be taken further. We need, you know, and everything is kind of about like pushing the envelope and pushing those like around those around me. Even
everything
mixers.
Everything we've talked about, it seems, then has led to this moment where you just are able to offer a pristine quality product to everyone, and at the end of the day, that reputation gets around and people are going to want to work with you.
Yep. Mixers as well. That's like coming back to like working with mixers. I think, you know, especially as you like do more and more prominent stuff, you tend to get less feedback on your work, just because, you know, it's that bias. It's like the Halo one, where everyone thinks like, oh, they've done this, so it must be good. Being able to like push back on stuff, or being like, you know, gracefully talking to people about like, hey, do you think maybe the vocals could come up a little bit? Like, I think that stuff is super important as well, to like see how far we could push the overall product. Because a lot of the mastering I do, it's, you know, it's technical, but getting on the phone, opening my mouth will do way more for a record than like trying to EQ 600 hertz, you know, like I could do all the EQ in the world, but it's not going to raise that clap to where it needs to be. Right. So.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I mean, it's part of never stopping growing, never stop learning. Find ways to get that feedback too, though, right? And I mean, I was on with someone, you know, Black Pearl, the Kevin McCloskey earlier, who you know, and you know, we work together sometimes, and I was just like, hey, can you check this out for me? I just love feedback, you know, and never stop doing that. Never stop finding ways to improve.
Yep.
Do you, before we move on from kind of development of career and what might be useful to people who are listening to this, do you have any other last advice for the person coming up who's really trying to do this seriously that we haven't touched on that might be beneficial?
I mean, in my experience, everything that I like tried to skip over, I eventually needed to go revisit. And that comes, that's even including like things in school, like algebra, um, things in college, like statistics. Like, I think for me, like having a good understanding of statistics and being able to do statistical analysis is really pertinent to mastering, especially like given, you know, most things that are reported out are like statistics, loudness average, loudness range. Like, if you don't know the difference between an average and a range, like you're not going to do well dealing in numbers and that left-sided stuff, left brain stuff, right? So eventually I had to go back and really master those things that I tried to avoid in school, to be the engineer that I am today. Like, I don't think, you know, you can't be like a civil engineer without a thorough understanding of, you know, the things that you learned in high school, right? So
yeah. Break that down a little bit more when you talk about the way statistics relates to mastering. Are you talking like on the business side of things, or are you talking like on the technical mastering side of things?
Both. I mean, like when you're looking at an album and you're looking at the loudness range average, and you're like, oh, one of these looks like it might be. I'm not going to get into like the Six Sigma stuff, but like looks like it's an outlier, right? Like if I'm looking at like, all right, this one's negative 8.5 LUFS, negative 8.5 LUFS, negative 8.5 LUFS, negative 8.5. And then I see one that's like negative 15. Like, to me, that's immediately like, oh, that's like within the upper and lower bound of the spec that I've set for myself. And so like I might go revisit that, right? Being able to like quickly visualize those things for me increases the efficiency of my workflow. So I'm not spending a bunch of time like listening to 60 minutes of audio again, right? Like I can't be just doing an album and listening to 60 minutes over and over and over again. I need to be able to quickly identify like, hey, what's in and what's out of spec? Like what are my like upper and lower bounds for this album? That kind of thing, as well as like the business side, right? Like learning the difference between like patterns and the difference between trends made a huge impact in how I ran my business and how I solve problems, and you know, without being like a complete statistics professor. For me, it was like it's stuff that like I can look at now and be like, oh, okay, that doesn't look right.
Got it.
And I mean even learning like constants and things like RMS, right? Like all of those things are for me statistical in nature. And being able to understand those things just makes me have a more thorough understanding of like what it is that I'm looking for at the end.
We're talking about loudness here. I'd be happy to jump into a little more technical side of things with you. It'd be fun to geek out a little bit. But do you adjust your loudness per song, or do you have a sweet spot that you're really going for, or is it usually at the request of the artist?
I just know what I like, and like when I hear it in my room, so I'll get a mix, and it depends on the mix I get. But like if I get a mix that's like quieter, not limited, right, like full of transient information and high dynamic range, all like in this room, the mix will start right here, and as I start to master it, it's kind of climbs up the speakers and climb, like the stereo image gets wider, the bass gets deeper and tighter. And I know when it's loud enough, like by my ears hearing it in my room, but that's because I know my room really well. So you might see something come out of the studio that's at negative 11 LUFS, and then you might see something come out of the studio that's negative 7.5. And to me, all that means is that the mixes and the program material were a lot different. the like momentary max of some of the loudness, it's all like hitting around the same in here. Like, and it'll be from like -7 to like -4, depending on the program material. Like the more constant of signal that I get, the louder it's going to be. Whereas like if it's like sparse bass notes, like you're not going to get it super, super loud.
Got it. Yeah. And there must be some method there though, knowing that streaming services are going to be turning them down anyway. And you're way over the threshold of what they're going to be turning it down to. Does that change how you approach the master, or are you just not even thinking that at all? You're just hearing how the transients and how everything's responding in your room.
Yeah, I mean, like it doesn't like when it comes down to that, like I'm more focused on like the transcoding than the actual normalization, because like if I'm going to send back a file that's going to be transcoded with like a ton of artifacts in that process, then I get a little bit worried. But if I know that it's not distorting the transcoding and it's being lowered, it's still going to sound really good. And I have some releases that are like on Spotify, that I have Spotify on my phone, and I keep the loudness normalization on that app just to like check stuff out every once in a while, because I want to see what's happening, you know?
Right.
I don't listen. I listen on Tidal when I can. But,
right. Yeah.
I have Spotify and I have Apple Music to see what's happening in these masters when they get transcoded. And I have stuff on there that's like -7 LUFS. And it's like, even with the loudness norm turned on, it's punchier, it's cleaner, it's nicer sounding than some of its counterparts that were mastered at like much lower volumes. And I think that's just due to like the presence, the impact of like it's like the impact of the signal. Like it doesn't matter if you turn it up high or if you turn it down low, like it still retains its character. And that's kind of like how I master in here too. Like I have 2 volume settings. It's normal, and it's normal too, and one's lower and one's higher. But I go from like lower to higher to be able to hear different details. And if I collapse, if I'm listening to it at my louder level and I go down to my lower level and I'm like, oh, it's not bright enough again, like I'll work on the balance again, and then I'll bring it back up to the louder level and I'll be like, okay, it's perfect right here and it's perfect right here. And it's similar to like what's happening in loudness norm. Like they're just turning it down. Like sometimes it's creating artifacts. Like I don't like Tidal's loudness normalization. It sounds like wrong. There's something wrong about it. But again, I'm not listening to Tidal to have it be normalized. I keep all that off.
Turn that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, you turn that off. You're talking about artifacts. A lot of times we're talking about intermittent peaks and samples and different things. Is this for you more than just a lower output ceiling? Are you going in there with RX and working, like drawing in transient lines? And I mean, how deep are you going to get that?
So I look
out?
Yeah, I have like 3 things that I look at. So there's this, the TC electronic thing. And when I use it in the mode that I'm using it in, it does something. It doesn't report correctly when I'm in a sample rate above 48K.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually like that. It's like kind of it's kind of one of my cheat codes, because when it's not reporting correctly, it's trying to like convert it down to like some other shit, and it's detecting those inner sample peaks you were talking about. I'm pretty sure that's what's happening without looking under the hood. But I see it like not reading it right, and I'm looking at Sequoia, and Sequoia is reading it right. And so I try to like get it to not peak in this like dumb conversion. It's actually like one of the stupidest settings that I like that's broken on it, because it like helps me like see what's going to happen. So we'll use that, and then Sequoia, and then we've been using this other program called Streamliner. I don't know. Demetrius brought it in here, and I was like, what the hell is that? And I started like playing around with the codecs, and I'd go audition the codecs, as well as Sequoia has like a built-in like codec sampler, so you could see when it like will visualize the peaks, but you can also hear like what's happening on transcoding. So I'll go there and I'll kind of like find this like compromise of like, all right, this is like sounding really great, on Tidal Hi-Fi, like this is going to sound great, if it's played back on the radio or wherever Tidal, but it's also going to sound really great on Spotify with maybe one or two artifacts, but like not more than the other songs that are on there, right? So I'll kind of find, and there's back to statistics, like I'll find an optimized compromise. Ooh, optimized compromise
like
for
that.
where,
Trademark.
for where I think is best. It's like a sweet spot, like because now these days, as a mastering engineer, we're not only worried about translation on all these different playback systems. Like that's one level of translation, but we're worried about translation on all these different DSPs. So there is like another layer of complexity to like how we're getting stuff to translate. All right, is it going to sound good on my home theater speakers playing back on Spotify? Is it going to sound good in my car playing back on Apple Music? Is it going to sound good, on a little Beats pill playing back on, I don't know, Deezer or whatever? I don't know.
Right.
But like having all these things in mind and making decisions based off of where it's going to land. And sometimes
you're not doing multiple bounces, but you're just trying to find like the happy medium between all of it.
Yeah, and you can't. Like once it's uploaded, like that's it. So you have to kind of listen. I like the Streamliner. That thing works pretty well, but the meters, like if I'm looking at this broken TC Electronic thing and I like go on the Streamliner and I'm like not clipping the TC Electronic thing, it's usually good.
Yeah. Some people might not know these programs that you're talking about, these three programs you just mentioned. Could you break down how those work a little bit for those who are listening?
Yeah, so the TC Electronic Clarity, it's like this thing that sits on, you'll see it on people's desks. It has like a round circle. It like calculates loudness throughout like the length of program. But it also has like different like statistical outputs where it's like measuring like LUFs in like 10-second intervals, and then like for the entire program, and then like it'll output like the loudness range. Those are good numbers to look at, to be like, all right, am I, for me, I look at it like, am I competitive with myself? I'm like, all right, does this match kind of like what other stuff I've done? And so I'll like have a quick visual of that. It has a correlation meter, so you could see if stuff is like skewed towards like, left or right, or like different, just in and out of phase and stuff like that.
Issues, yeah.
As well as, what else does this thing have on it? Just like a regular peak meter and a true peak meter, which to my understanding, like true peak is measuring, it's basically a digital to analog conversion problem. Like some amplification systems will have overs, especially if they're smaller phone speakers and that type of stuff is like is how I understand it. So that's a super cool piece of technology. The Streamliner thing is like it's a VST that you could put into your DAW, and it has like, it'll say like Tidal, Spotify, and it'll have like Spotify free, Spotify premium, and you could like toggle between these different codecs and see how the output of your audio might be altered as it's being transcoded to these like different formats. Like I believe Spotify is like Ogg Vorbis, Apple Music is like, now it's ALAC, and just like all these different formats. So you could quickly audition and be like, all right, is this going to sound right as it's being transcoded to these different formats? That's a cool piece of software. And then Magic Sequoia, that is the DAW that I use to master in. It is, I like to piss people off when I say this. It's objectively, it's not even subjective. This is the best DAW to master in. There's nothing that's superior to it because of the level of control and granularity. I can splice 1 millisecond of audio and apply up to 6 VSTs on just that millisecond. So if I'm trying to like de-click or de-crackle something, or like de-S, just one S in the whole song, I just take this little splice and I do whatever I need to do to that millisecond. And as it's passing through, you can't even hear any imperfection anymore. It's 100% gone. But that's like only one of the best things I like about Sequoia. It also has a ton of it has meters that I just like can't live without. So similar to like the TC Electronic, just the visuals are different. So my mind kind of interprets these meters a little bit differently. I'm looking at my peak meter and the RMS meter to like know if my bass is right, especially in like heavy 808 songs. I'm looking at like the fuck is that thing called? It's like such a simple name that they call it, like spectrometer or something like that, to like see if, you know, there's possibly some areas I could work on frequency wise, as well as like a really cool spectral editor that I don't even know how it does it, but it like I could select pieces of the spectrum and it'll like completely eliminate errors or like things that I could hear that are not pleasant or like not in harmony with the record. I still have a lot of control in Sequoia. So
very cool. I'm sure everyone's Googling it right now, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's very cool. I mean, you talk on your website, which is Million Dollar Snare. That's the name of your studio, and you have a website, milliondollarsnare.com. You talk about how you focus on repeatability and replayability as opposed to like the one-time listen. Can you break down how that changes how you approach mastering?
Yeah, there's another statistical reference there too. So I'm not focused on like people hearing a song once and being like, oh man, this is amazing. And then they go back to it and they listen and they're like, oh, there's a blip right there, or like a clip, you know, a crackle or something. So when they like my real focus in mastering is like, I want people to be able to replay a song for like 10 hours straight and not be able to, you know, find anything that like dissuades them from listening to it again. That's kind of like our creed here.
It's not fatiguing. It's not
exactly.
grating.
It's not like I'm not just going for like, all right, let's flatten out the entire frequency spectrum and like just make it as loud as possible for loudness sake. Like we want people to come back and be like, wow, this sounds really musical. I could really hear that like piano pluck in the left headphone, and the percussion seems to be like dancing all around me. That's kind of the focus, rather than like, you know, just putting
like a
a
bombastic like
high shelf on it and raising it all up as high as possible to get it as loud as possible so that people hear it once. I really want people to like come and revisit these songs, and I think it shows in like the work that we've been doing. Like the past few years, like we've had a few records that have been very impactful to the point where it's like those records are like kind of changing how people are perceiving music, right? Like, so I think for me, like it's important to like really be focused on like, all right, is this the like most repeatable and replayable thing I could send back? To me, it's just like perfection. Like, is this the most perfect thing I could do? Is this the best thing I could do? Like, does this just sound great every time I play it, wherever I play it, without like getting that fatigue that you're talking about? Like that one Metallica album, what was the one they like got? Everyone said it was too loud, but then on Guitar Hero, everyone was like, no, this is the version we like, the Guitar Hero version, because it was like dynamic and it was like quiet and not smashed. I always remember that because it was like the first time I've heard of engineering, and it was before I like even was an engineer. But I remember there was like Like their fans gave them, shit for that particular thing. We don't want it to be like that. We want people to like come back, listen to it over and over and over. Because if I can increase an artist's streams by even like a couple percent, like that's dollars in their pockets, So
listenability. And it's more than artifacts. It's going through and just being really particular with things. And so the tools you're using are, you like to use tools then that give you a lot of control. They allow you to get really particular in there, as opposed to like, I mean, how much of it could be something you go back to the mixer and say, fix this? Do you find yourself doing that, or do you find yourself fixing stuff, or to what kind of ratio?
It depends. If it's in my control, then I'll fix it. If it's out of my control, then I'll like ask for help fixing it. But a lot of the things, like these days, especially with the technology that we have, like they're very much in my control. And some of the things, like, the kick that the person selected, like we can't change that. And sometimes I'll ask the mixer. This actually happened a lot with my friend Sirius, but I'll like ask him, I'll be like, man, this song needs a kick. And he'll be like, I added a kick to the whole song and they didn't like it. And so like, luckily I work with people who are willing to take those same risks as well. But sometimes we'll get to that point where it's like, I'll be like, hey, did you ever think of adding a kick? And he'll be like, yes, I did that. And they didn't like it at all. And so we'll be stuck kind of doing what, our jobs without like the thing that we think is easy. And so he'll be like working on a transient that doesn't exist. He'll be like creating a transient that doesn't exist. I'll be accentuating the transient that they created that doesn't exist, that didn't exist before. And we'll be able to get to this point of like, all right, this is the best possible outcome. Some of the stuff I was telling you about though earlier, like I can take out all those S's. There was a band recently that I started working with, so the background is the mixing engineer had been mastering their stuff because they kept sending his mixes out to all these different mastering engineers. And they're like, we don't like it. Like the mix ref was better. Like we like the ref better. And he kept telling them, he's like, this is like my guy. This is the guy to go to. Like, use this guy. And like he's been telling me about this for a year, and they've been refusing. They've been just sending it to other mastering engineers and like not liking what they've been getting back. So he sent me one song, and I was like listening to his ref. Like I'd mastered the song and then I pulled in his ref. I don't like to listen to refs before I master. Like I like to get it to where I like really am liking it, and like I'll do my own ref for myself, and then I'll pull in the ref at the very end when I'm like, all right, like should I send this out? Right. And so I pulled in his ref like right before I was about to send it out. I listened to it and I was like, okay, I think I know what they're liking about the ref. And I was also hearing like things in my master that I was liking way more than the ref. But there was like a couple things in his ref that I was pretty sure I knew what they were like gravitating to. So I made a couple minor adjustments, like very, very minor adjustments before I sent it back. And he sent me a screenshot of the group text with them of like when he sent the master back. And the band members were like, the message literally said, this guy might be the GOAT. And the next one was like, it's perfect, no notes. And then the third band member was like, I can't even believe this is possible. He just like took your like it was like a review like that you would post on your website. I remember it so distinctly because of the history of the band. And they were like, yeah, I didn't even know this was possible, but he just like took your mix to a whole another level. That's not where it ended though. So one is easy, like we were talking about before. It's the next one that it's like, all right, here's the next. And so the same thing happened. He sent me the next song. It was song number 2. It was like 2 singles coming out. And I did my master, like did my own little ref thing. And I was like, this is like damn near perfect. Let me pull in his ref. And the same thing happened. It was like, all right, I could see like what I think they like about the ref, made one or two adjustments, sent it back, and it was the exact same thing. It was like perfect, no notes, and they're like, I can't believe like this has so much detail in it now. And it was like the details that were really, really great were the ones that I was trying to surface, and some of the details that were not so great, like I was trying to mask. And so with that like level of control I had, like if you look at the file that I eventually ended up exporting, it's like my, analog print that I mastered. But in this print, there's all these little splices of like where I got really detailed. A DS here, a D crackle here, some like bass note that was like, I don't know, clashing. Yeah, like clashing almost. Like it gets pulled down a little bit here for just like 2 milliseconds. And like as you're playing this along the timeline, you'd be like, oh, damn, this sounds perfect. But if I took all those things off, you would hear all those like little imperfections. And when I sent it back to the band, they're not hearing, like I'm invisible. Like you don't even know I was there in that, in what I did. But when they get it, they're just like, they don't even know what they're hearing. And one of them said, yeah, well, I'm like really picky. So this is like amazing to me. And the thing I was thinking in my head was like, I don't think you're as picky as I am.
If you were picky, you would have got that stuff the first time.
Well, no, it was just like I don't think they're as picky as I am. I think that like I've out-pickied them.
That's really cool. And I think for people who are learning, I don't want to send them down the wrong path. I think there's like this level of pickiness you can get to after you really master the fundamental stuff.
Yeah,
right?
you have to learn the rules, and then like in order to
Learn
know
to break them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you also talk on your website about like, I think you describe it as like, kind of magic stuff you're doing with digital and analog special tools.
That's an older bio, but we'll let it fly.
Yeah, right. But like, is this the type of stuff you're talking about, or are there other tools that? Are you just talking about getting in and just being really particular, and it's just like attention to detail?
No, I mean like the
other tools that are pushing the envelope.
I have this Razer computer with this new 13th gen Intel i9 fully spec'd out. This one has a 4080 in it. I can do things that I've never been able to do in real time with like. Have you ever used RX like in like ultra mode? It's just like
super
stops.
hoggy.
Yeah, you have to like freeze tracks. Like I don't have to freeze tracks or do anything. I'm working so fast. Like the ideas of how to like solve these problems are coming to me so fast that if I don't act on them immediately, I lose them. So the technology is allowing me to make these decisions almost immediately, which for in mastering is a great thing to do. Usually the first time I'm listening to a song is like the best time because I have this completely unbiased view of like, oh, this is what this needs, So when I'm listening, like with that in mind, and I'm able to make these decisions and I'm not being handicapped by the technology, then I can, work faster and have a better product overall.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think I got scared almost for any of the students that I work with, which I'm always trying to tell people to speed up their process. So when you were talking about like a 16-hour master or whatever you said it was, I was going, for most people, that sounds like a rabbit hole. And diminishing returns over time. Right. But you're all about, it sounds like the understanding that the earlier you can fix the problems, the quicker you can fix the problems, the more objective you can stay throughout. I mean, and really that 16-hour thing was kind of your own personal exploration. You were like learning and pushing yourself, and it was just like you were exploring sound.
Yeah, that's it. Like I've done that so many times with like producing and everything. Like there was a time where I stayed up for like damn near 3 days making one beat when I was like 18 years old. And it was like those times for me, define like who I am in my ear today. And like, because I was able to spend 16 hours on that one signal, like I know what is possible now when I get other similar types of music. So it was like doing all that basically like front loading that work makes it so that I don't have to do all this other discovery as I'm working now. And part of that, like 10,000 hours of, experience.
Yeah.
That was
100%.
part of my 10,000 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at some point, again, like you said, you can break the rules, you can get really picky, but you can do all this now because of technology a lot faster. That's the one thing technology keeps allotting us is the ability to speed up.
Yeah. As far as like the analog stuff, I was telling someone today, I think I'm done like buying new analog stuff. I don't think that there's going to be any new analog gear in my studio. It's taking it as far as it can be taken. And the level of control that I need exists in the digital domain these days. So I'll take it out. And I mean, I still, I know the limits of both, of analog and digital. And I think really understanding the strengths of analog and digital, like I don't need 7 EQs. Like it doesn't make sense. Like I just need one. I don't need 7 saturators. I just need one. I don't need 7 pairs of tubes. I just need one really good custom, modded one. And that's what I use. I use my really one good custom modded SPL. The Soma pretty much stays off. I use the Porter grinder in most everything I do, even if it's flat. I like how it sounds. Like there's just some magic to it, even though it is like so passive. And then my better maker, as well as like my brain unit. The brain unit
which better maker do you have?
The limiter, the version 1.
Got it.
Yeah. And then this Crookwood. The Crookwood I can't live without, just because it's like in charge of my analog output world. So like I need to be able to hear the things that I need to hear. And this thing has a bunch of cool stuff. Like it has like mono sum and like mono difference, which I feel like is lacking in a lot of monitor controllers. Swap left and right is my most used button on the Crookwood. I need that too. But as far as like just buying up gear, like this is it for me.
You're done.
This is it. Gear companies can send me gear though for free. I don't mind that.
Might as well, right? Yeah, it's. I wasn't going to bring this up today because I've been pretty outspoken about this recently, and I make a lot of people mad, and people want to cancel me because I keep talking about how I think analog is becoming less and less valuable. Digital is becoming way more valuable, and that digital is even out analoging analog a lot of times now. Like not just giving you more control, but the algorithms are so good sometimes that I compare it to the analog piece of gear and I go, sounding really, really close or really good, and to have the convenience of that, a lot of people are upset with that. But do you think it's moving that way? Do you think it's not just giving you more control, but actually starting to have the algorithms create analog sound that can be competitive with analog gear?
Yeah, I did one master this past December and November, and my brain unit, this Crookwood that I was talking about, actually died. And so I was like troubleshooting it, and I was like waiting for the manufacturer to like get me a part. And I had turned in this album, and it was like already said and done. Like everything had been turned in and submitted, all the alts ran. And they came back to me with, hey, we're adding a feature to this song. It's a new artist on the roster of our label. It has to be on here. And so I was like, oh, I can't really get this to you today. Like my thing is down. And they're like, oh shit, we need it today. Could you do like a different master on it or something? And I was like, okay. And so like I did what I needed to do. But what I did differently was I pulled this mix in. It was the same exact mix other than the feature was added. So I would have probably run like a similar master, maybe done some other detail work in like the section where the feature was. But I pulled this in and I was like, I wonder if I can recreate my analog chain with like just plugins in the box. And so I'm like looking at my Better Maker. I like pull over an Ozone 10 maximizer, and like I set my output ceiling and my gain reduction to like the same exact setting. So I kept everything in the same exact sequence, and I was just like seeing if I could get close. And what ended up happening was the end result was, it was like the same exact loudness as the other one. It was the same exact stereo image, maybe even enhanced. And like the one thing that I liked better was like the kick transient was a lot faster in the all digital master. In this one particular record, like it doesn't always work out this way. Like if it did, I wouldn't have any of my analog stuff. I would just be 100% in the box. Because like I'm saying, I do the digital rendition a lot of times. But for this one, it actually sounded a little bit better when I tried to recreate what was done in my desk.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that for me, like kind of really sold it, where I was like, yeah, this is, I mean, if we're going to be totally real here, I'm like A-B'ing them. And the one thing that the analog master had that the other one couldn't replicate, I tried, was just this like warmth on the sides. And I think it's, or maybe it wasn't even warmth, but just like presence. Like I feel like I can color in the stereo image a lot more in analog, especially considering like some of my gear just, it has a crazy frequency response. Like the tube vitalizer goes up to 100K, it says. So I'm able to just like fill in blank space with some of the analog stuff that I'm not able to fill in, being limited to, you know, like even just like a digital sample rate. Like,
yeah, I totally agree. But as you're talking about, wait till we've only just begun almost with some of this, and wait till the computers are even faster, wait till the algorithms are even better, and then we may find that that you can do everything.
Yeah,
I don't think it's that far away.
We vote with our wallets too, you know. Like the more we're buying plugins and the less we're buying analog stuff, the more. I mean, Universal Audio saw it. They were like, maybe we should like focus more on the software side than the hardware side, while still keeping like their legacy products. You know, but like if you've seen the evolution of that, like just one brand in particular, it's like all their money now comes from selling the interface and selling the plugins. That's it.
Yeah, I'm all for it, man. I love to see the price of entry for people upcoming who want to make great music. It's only going to push the industry farther. I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as a good thing and empowering for people to be able to get on there and make waves without, you know, $1 million worth of gear.
Yeah. If I were starting a mastering studio today in 2023, I would, you know, maybe start with like this analog monitor controller from Crookwood, but everything else I'd be focused in on my speakers, my room, speakers and room.
That's it.
That's it.
Amen. All my students are rejoicing right now because that's what we're all about. Getting that dialed in, and then the opportunity to actually hear music with an ear train in a room that's somewhat accurate, right? That's everything. Because how can you learn to use the tools if you can't hear it properly, and how can you hear it properly without a room that can translate it?
Yep. I mean, and today, like, I listen so differently than how I used to listen when I was a kid. I still play stuff from when I was a teenager, and I'll notice things that I never heard before. For instance, there was this on Eminem's debut album, on that song Guilty Conscience, when Eminem comes in, there's like a slight distortion on one of like the kicks that I never heard when I was like, it's like the kick and the vocal at the same time. I never heard it when I was young, and it's all I can hear every single time I play the song as a, an adult, which is like insane. So like, if you want to not enjoy stuff so much, also like that's where
it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, because now every time I hear it, I'm like, and I was like, am I tripping? Is this just on Tidal? And I went on Spotify and I heard the same thing, and I went on Apple Music and I heard the same thing, and I was like, oh man, this is crazy. Like, I couldn't unhear it. I don't know
about you, like stuff in my house starts bugging me now, like the hum of the refrigerator is like 85 hertz.
That's so funny, because me and my wife will be laying in bed and I'm like, you hear that? And she'll be like, what? And it'll be like some conduit running to the fan above the ceiling, and like, you don't hear that, like that like buzzing noise, or
It's a blessing and a curse, man. I'm right there with you. Yeah. Usually a lot of time when we do this podcast, if you haven't listened before, we like to do a little palate cleanser right in the middle here. Talk about something totally off topic, a little bit silly. So I want to ask you, in all seriousness, where are you at on aliens?
I mean, statistically, they gotta be out there. Like, there has to be life somewhere else.
That's the safe answer. Statistically, yeah.
There has to be. Like,
are they here? Are they interacting?
And I mean, we're used to, like, what did my anthropology professor call it? Like, we're used to, like, the modalities of Earth, and not necessarily, like, we're like, oh, if there's water, there could be life, but I don't necessarily like subscribe to that. Like, there could be like some life form that like thrives in liquid nitrogen or something. I don't know. I think statistically there has to be something else out there than us.
Are they here though, or are they really far away?
Probably really far away.
So all the sightings, the UFO kind of government releases and all that stuff is something else.
Yeah, I mean, if they made it to here, they could definitely destroy our governments, because our governments are not smart.
What if they have like the Star Trek approach though? It's like the what do they call that?
Do no harm, like they can't be seen.
Can't be seen until they figure out warp or something.
It's possible. We could be like that one island off the Indian coast of like that tribe where no one contacts, and they don't like even know that anyone exists. Like, could be. I'm not
but they're definitely out there. They may or may not be here.
Yeah, I mean,
is that the official depth stance?
Yeah, in order to get here, you would just, I mean, like, you would have to be traveling to get here from anywhere else within a lifetime, you'd have to be traveling faster than the speed of light, which is
faster than light travel.
Which, I mean, we say, are we in agreement that that's not possible, or it is possible now?
They're finding that there might be ways around that, bending space-time.
But, like, could we survive that speed? I mean, I guess I don't know. If you get inertia out in space, maybe. But I don't know. It just doesn't make like, there's a lot I have to wrap there's way more that I don't know about, existence than what I do know. Basically, that applies to everything.
How about second question? Have you ever seen a ghost?
No, I don't believe in any of that shit.
Don't believe in ghosts.
Yeah. My cousin sometimes says stuff to me like that, and I just, like, my whole body shuts off in conversation. And I'm like, no, I don't.
I'm out. They're not here. All that's just a collective consciousness or something like that.
Yeah, I don't believe in any of that.
Right on, man. You mentioned something before that little break that I thought was interesting. I wanted to actually ask you about today, which was do you have a lot of different gear for different genres? I think you were talking about this just a minute ago. Or is it really coming to, for you, I have my gear, I just really know how to use it and I can bend it to whatever situation?
Yeah, I mean, like I was like this Portico like doesn't get turned on a lot. The Selma doesn't get turned on a lot. It's like I have these like few pieces of gear that I really like that are dependable, and then I kind of get the sound from everything else in the box these days. So
Got it. So it's more about just really knowing how to use the tools. You don't have to have a bunch of different stuff for different genres.
this Corgam 3 that you see on my desk, I always wanted to buy a different keyboard. Like I've had this keyboard since 2005. This keyboard's almost 20 years
That's
old.
old.
So I've had this keyboard since 2005, and I always wanted like a new keyboard come out, like a Phantom or a Motif or whatever, and I'd be like, oh, I need to go get that keyboard, and I would never be able to like afford it, especially back then. And what I did with this keyboard is I actually like found the manual, and I started like reading the manual and learning how to like program patches from an init patch. I think that's like initialized from what I remember. But it would like say, I would like initialize it and then I'd like make my own stuff. And I got to know this keyboard in and out. And so I treat each VST, each piece of gear, the same way. Like if you're not in like the advanced settings or under the hood of every single plugin, then you're not like squeezing all the juice out of the lemon, like I want to get all of the juice out of the lemon. I want to fully be able, like if I pay for something, $100, I'm getting all $100 worth of it. That's my opinion as I get older.
No, I love that. I wish more students would adopt that and really learn the tools. They think the next plugin or the next thing is going to be the answer, but it's just about really understanding what you have.
That said, though, sometimes it is inspiring to get a new plugin. Sometimes I'm like, let's try this thing out, and I'll try it out, and it'll really do something new for me. But if it's like something like an EQ or something, like I don't know, like there's only so much EQ an EQ can do.
Well, I love the new plugin as much as the next guy, but it's more about the person starting out who thinks that the barrier between them and where you are is some plugin.
It's the room.
Yeah, it's the room in the
It
ears.
is the room. Yeah.
It's the room in the ears. I love that. Has your stance or the way that you use compression in limiting changed recently? Do you use a lot of compression, or are you more on the limiter clipper side? How do you approach compression in your mastering?
I mean, someone asked me this. Another engineer asked me this the other day, and they were like, "How do you like don't use any compression?" And I was like, "Well, technically, like limiting is like brick wall compression, yeah. But it does it in such a way that you don't like really hear it as much." But yeah, basically, like that's my approach. Like I'm limiting. Or I'm limiting stuff, and then I'm turning it down, and then I'm limiting it again, and then I'm like turning it down, then I'm limiting it, and then I'm like turning everything up. And that's like basically how I approach like getting things loud. Is like everyone talks about. I think people when they say dynamic range, they really mean transient impact or like transient punch, because I'm really not like increasing dynamic range of anything. I'm reducing dynamic range. Like that's like what average loudness means. It means that the average is like going up, like so yeah, I do limiting, but I do it in stages, and I'm very big on like in problem solving. Like one of the things that you learn in job methods in TWI. It's like it's like, this is all lean Toyota stuff. You learn that sequence is very important when you're trying to solve a problem. Like, so for instance, like seasoning a steak before you put it in the pan has a lot more impact than putting it in the pan and seasoning it afterward. And it's because like the steak is able to absorb some of those seasonings, and it, like the pan cooks some of those seasonings and unlocks more and deeper flavor. So I've like have the same approach to mastering. Like I might limit in the beginning, and then I'll apply some like saturation or like EQ, or I'll like reverse I'll like switch around the sequence. So I'm like, let's see what the saturator sounds like right here now, and I'll like play with the sequence of how I'm doing things in order to like get like the most optimized sound. But for me, it is very much just limiting, but doing it in such a way where it's like, all right, I'm just doing a little bit here. Okay, now adding some EQ, maybe working on the sides a little bit, and then I'm doing another limiting here. Then I'm sending it into my outboard gear, but it's mostly limiting. That's why the Neve doesn't get turned on anymore.
Right. Well, I've kind of started to go the same way, especially in the last year or so. Much less compression, much more limiting, like you're talking about. And for anyone listening who knows me, they'll know that I'm stoked right now because all I use are food analogies when I talk about mixing and mastering. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely true. Except the one hole in your analogy is that pepper, for example, is better to put on after because pepper will burn and bitter the taste. So
really?
It's better to do salt and garlic before, but pepper after.
I like pepper before, though.
Do you?
Yeah.
Maybe we like the bitter.
I do. Well, yeah, I do. I don't know. There's something about it.
Love it. Yeah, I've heard that. I've seen the pros talk about how pepper burns, but the point of it all is that you're going into it and you're solving problems. You're not seeing it as like, when I master, I do this process. You go, I'm perceiving problems that need to be fixed, and I'm experimenting with, throw all the rules out of the book or any sort of process I think needs to exist. I'm finding the right recipe for how to solve this problem.
Yeah, well, that said, I have like a standard.
Sure.
But I deviate from the standard depending on like what's happening with the program material. So I have like, I know that I'm going to put a limiter at the end. Like the limiter is always going to be at the end. I don't think I'm ever going to send back something that doesn't have a limiter at the end of it. But what comes before then is subject to change. But I have like my few set, like, all right, that usually this doesn't ever sound better. Like it's the fundamentals. Like there's very few times where my tube vitalizer sounds better before the EQ. Usually it's the EQ into the tube vitalizer, and the tube vitalizer sounds a little bit better. But,
so it's is it because it's not causing resonances or saturation and frequencies that are unwanted? Is that?
I just don't even know. Like I just know that when I swap them back and forth, I'm like, yeah, this
sounds better.
Yeah, it sounds better.
It's probably taking out frequencies.
That's the other problem with analog is like analog is. That's what Demetrius had a lot of trouble wrapping his head around too when he started working in this studio. Is like there's no meters on any of this gear that tells you like when it's clipping or when it's like getting messed up. So you really have to use your ears. And for me, like I'm not one to overcomplicate things, and I like the practical application of stuff rather than like understanding what exactly is getting messed up. I just know that when I swap them around, I'm like, oh, sounds good, sounds bad. And usually that's enough for me to make a decision off of. Sounds good, sounds bad.
Got it. You talk about saturation. Do you have something you're really looking for when you use saturation and mastering? What's your approach with mastering? With saturation and mastering?
It depends what I'm saturating. Like, I feel like we have a lot of control these days. So like sometimes I'll saturate low end with like one particular plugin, or like I'll try to saturate like the sides, with the tube gear. Or sometimes like I'll try to drive the entire signal with like that newfangled saturate plugin. But it just depends. It depends on what I'm going for and like what I can get away with. Like sometimes when I have a really, really dynamic mix with a lot of really loud elements and a lot of really quiet elements, like I'll need to I'll reach for saturation more and more to like drive the signal so that it gets more constant and more present, because there's no amount of limiting that's gonna make the vocals sound more present. Like I need to be able to like kind of drive stuff. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Just depends what it needs. But I'm using different types, different saturators to give it what it needs.
So you're talking about mostly enhancement stuff, or do you ever use it to like transient tame, or is that all inclusive, like both?
Probably all inclusive.
Got it. It's kind of both.
Yeah. So like if I'm driving like the lowest part of the signal, like, and I can't go past 0, like it's going to be perceived as the transients being tamed as well, even though it's more just like I'm increasing low level information.
Very cool. What's the number one thing that you've learned with regard to EQ that's kind of changed how you approach EQ in mastering?
I don't know. I mean, if you watch a lot of my TikToks, like I'm not doing a lot, and when I am doing it, like it's very targeted, and it's like to be invisible, and that's partially the reason I use this Golly mastering EQ. When I first bought it, I like plugged it in and I'm like EQing stuff and I'm like doing like these major moves. And I was like, what the fuck? I got scammed. Like I really thought I got scammed. And then I hit the bypass switch and I got to hear like, I was like, whoa, that like really changed it. But it did it in such a way that I wasn't even perceiving the change. Like it was so transparent. But it had an impact on like the overall record. So that's kind of my approach to EQ is like you should be able to feel it but not hear it. Like if I can hear it and I'm boosting something that's like out of harmony with like the the scale of the song, like I'm going to be boosting something that's out of harmony. Like it might sound good, and that's the other thing is like it might sound good in this one very small section of the song you're listening to, but then once you listen to it and all the rest of these other sections, like it's not good. So keeping that in mind is also like forefront of my mind. Having the accurate room, it's like, all right, I know that like there is a hole in this frequency for the entire duration of this record, and so that's when I start like boosting. But a lot of the times, like I'm cutting, I'm manipulating, and I'd rather like with EQ, like I'd kind of rather focus on problem frequencies than like
enhancement.
Yeah, because I don't think
so. You're not using it to enhance. You're trying to be as invisible as possible, essentially.
Exactly.
And fix and then just solve the problems that exist.
I'm doing most of my boosting. Well, I do pretty much all my boosting in analog, and I do all my cutting in digital.
Sure. And even then, when you're boosting, though, the goal is to be invisible.
Yep. Like you'll like never see anything that's like plus 3 dB. I hear that all the time. Like, oh, mastering engineers never go past plus 3 dB. Like, I usually never go past 1 dB.
Yeah.
Because like it's being amplified. Like 3 dB at the beginning of the chain is like amplified by However, I can't even do the math in my head because of like what's happening afterwards with all these different limiters. So like 1 dB relative to what I'm doing in the limiting stage is like amplifying that 1 dB times who knows the amount in the end stage. So like if I'm doing like a 0.2 boost, that's usually enough with like the amount of limiting that's coming afterward.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I don't think a lot of people think about that. They think, oh, well, I'm just doing 1 or 2 dB. But then when you consider the compression or limiting and everything else you're doing at the end, when you're talking about sonic energy, it's actually a lot more.
Yeah. And so sometimes there is one. So I've been using this MD4 plugin from TC Electronic. And that's like one of the last limiters I use. And it has an EQ section. And the reason I like this is because I like brick wall limiters that have like these other things built inside of it, because I know I could do these things without creating like any additional peaks in the signal. And so like it has a really good limiter, or sorry, a really good EQ that I'll be able to use almost second to last in my chain. And it'll be doing like the last little bit of EQ. And usually the thing that this thing works really well on is like the top end. So I'll give it like just a little bit more shine second to last. And I won't have to, I could do a lot more because it's second to last rather than like if it's at the very beginning of my chain.
That's really, really interesting. That's really, really valuable stuff. I like the idea of fixing problems and being as transparent as possible with everything that you're doing. I think sometimes younger mastering engineers feel like they need to wow people by boosting something that makes it sound more bombastic, but that's like the wrong mindset. Whereas if you can give them the mix that they love, fix it in a way that's very transparent, that they almost don't even know what the difference is, which goes back to like the experience you had with the band that you were working with, different things. They don't even know why it's sounding so different, but it just feels enhanced. And that's your approach with everything, sounds like. What about imaging, widening? Do you do a lot of mid-side? Do you do a lot of stereo widening stuff? We tend to teach it to younger engineers that stuff's best done in the mix, that if you can create wideness in the mix, then you don't have to worry about doing it on a stereo sense. But do you do some
I
stuff
do a
with
lot
that?
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I was saying
proceed
before,
with caution, I guess. It's a powerful tool, but you have to really know what you're doing. So how is it that you approach it?
there's really only a couple places. So like I was saying before, like when I get a mix, it'll start to like climb up my speakers by the time I'm done. Like sometimes you just can't get it to climb without doing any mid-side processing, but I'm doing it in a very specific way that's specific to my system. And so like my Crookwood has this MS codec, and I can increase the sides in such a manner that like it's almost like the Golly, where it's like you'd only ever notice it if I bypassed it. Like if I turned it off, you'd be like, oh, whoa, that's crazy. It got this width, but you couldn't even like see or hear, like you can't hear it until it's bypassed. The other thing is I work a lot on the sides with like a digital EQ, like a FabFilter Pro Q, before it's even going into analog. And I'm not doing any boosting when I'm doing that. I'm usually like working out like problem frequencies when I'm doing that kind of stuff, because I'll hear something in the sides, and I'm like in my room, like you'll hear like a constant frequency that's like out of, like I've talked about a bunch today before, like it's out of harmony with everything else. And it'll be like like just not like a note that's in tune. And so I'll find the note in like the little piano roll part of the EQ, and I'll just dip that note. Like it'll either be like a dynamic EQ or I'll dip it, but I'll listen a bunch to make sure that it's like a really good move. And I'll do like just the stereo band there. Some like most of the time though, if that's happening, I won't, or sorry, the side band. Most of the time, if that's happening, I'll like switched to the stereo band as well to see what that dip would be like if I like did the entire, like both channels left and right. And a lot of the times, like the stereo dip is better unless it's like one instrument that's like panned to the side that's clashing with the vocals. That's when that side band does numbers for me. So I really like doing that. And then the last place I'll do mid side is that MD4 right before. It's my second to last thing. It has a stereo mode and it has a mid side mode, and depending on what limiting I'm going for, I'll like toggle between both, and you have to really listen because you could really fuck some stuff up. But I'll toggle between those two modes, and sometimes with the limiter acting differently on the sides as it does on the mid channel, it'll make the whole master sound way more 3D. But again, proceed with caution. I sent something back actually a couple days ago to Sirius, who I was talking about earlier. And he's like, man, I don't know, like the 808, like something's wrong in this master. He's like, the 808 transient or something. He's like, maybe the music's too loud. And after my ego calmed down for 2 seconds of like, no, that's not how things are. I was like, I think I know exactly what he's hearing. And so all I did was turn it from mid side back to stereo, and I sent the master back to him, and he's like, this master is perfect.
Oh.
So yeah, proceed with caution. Sometimes I'm like in here and I'm like, oh man, this is hella more 3D, because I'm like listening to like both the renditions, and I liked the other one more, but I could hear how, like, since the record was like very 808 focused, that having the sides enhanced like that took away from his already really good mix. And he had it where he wanted it, and so I was trying to like take it a little bit further, do my own thing, but he had it where he wanted it, and sometimes that's like more important than me trying to take it further. Like sometimes it needs to stay, sometimes it just needs to be like the best version of what it already was and not something else.
Exactly. Going back to transparency, going back to being invisible.
Yeah.
I love that. There's some absolute gold nuggets in there for anyone listening right there. I mean, that's how you really should approach mid-side or the stereo widening conundrum when you're mastering, is with that kind of intention and not just throwing it on because you think it's enhancing width or something like that. It has to have a ton of intention.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I experiment, and sometimes it's fun to press buttons, but
sure,
you have to go back, and like undo the button multiple times and be like, was this better, or was I just like having fun pressing this button?
I love it. I'm so much in the world of like, I got to teach you the rules first. So I'm coming from that over here, and you're
I'm like breaking all the rules.
I want to break all the rules. I love that. That's so valuable though for people to hear, and both are obviously really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, you heard it. I broke a rule and I didn't get the master approved. So, but it's also like knowing when to, I knew exactly what I needed to change when he sent me that note. I was like, oh, it's this one setting, and I sent it back, and I think he texted me this morning. He's like, master is perfect. And I was like, okay, cool.
The last question I always like to leave off with, and again, thank you for taking so much time. It's been very intriguing. I think there's tons of valuable content for everyone that's listening. And thank you for being so transparent about just your process and everything. You're not hiding anything. It seems like you really want to shine light on the whole process.
Yeah, thank you.
What is it that I know we're always continuing to learn? We never get to the point where we stop learning, or at least we shouldn't, I don't think. What is it that your brain has been fixated on recently, that you've been really diving deep on, that you've been studying?
Yeah, so I'm in a very different place than I used to be. I remember I used to be at Target like working on like a dubstep song and being like, damn, how do I get this sound? And I would like think about it for 8 hours, like how I was going to design the sound. And I'd have like all the oscillators in my mind and like the exact LFO, I was going to draw to like make the thing sound how I wanted it to sound. By the end of the shift, I'd be like, all right, I'm going home and I'm going to do this. And so I'd be really focused on how I'm going to get the sound. Today, and I'm just saying today, like I'm really not focused on that. I really believe I can get any sound I want. I'm more focused on like, all right, how am I going to like develop the people around me? How am I going to like push the people around me to like get better? And so it's starting here internally. I'm really focused on pushing Demetrius out there into like the world of mastering, because I think the gatekeeping we talked about earlier, like I don't want this guy to sit behind me for 20 years and like then when I die, it's like, all right, now you get a shot. Like that seems like such a waste of time to me. Like
Right.
We're going to be failing immediately, and the quicker we fail, the quicker we're going to succeed. So I'm trying to get him out there and get as much experimentation and failure as possible, and thus like get him some success, because that's how it happened for me. And I don't think that you have to be like a 60, 70-year-old person to be a mastering engineer. Like I think with the technology and the knowledge we have, like we could be doing this at a much younger age and like adding a lot of value in, because I think, he likes different stuff than I like, because he's like a different generation than me. And so like there's this whole other sound that is emerging that he likes, that he needs to kind of like carve out. So I think that's super important, rather than having like all this stuff be like gate kept. I think that, I think about how these new guys are going to like break through. That's what's been on my mind.
That's so wonderful, man. There's not enough of that in the industry. We've both been in it long enough to see the people who gatekeep. It's wonderful to talk to people, and it's probably why mastering.com and you have been a natural fit, and we're really excited to have you come on board and work with some of our students and different things. But you genuinely seem like one of the good guys in this industry. Demetrius is lucky to have that kind of mentorship. It's the mentorship I would hope that most people could find somewhere, but to not someone who's gatekeeping, but genuinely wants them to grow and sees the differences, sees the ways that they're innovating on their own and trying to enhance that and pull that out of them and giving them opportunities. That's very cool, man.
I am a hard ass on him sometimes, though. So.
You got to do that too.
When the pillows are messed up, he'll get a text message from me. Same how my brother used to get one. Those pillows back there, I'll be like, the pillows are not right. You guys know this is my pet peeve. It'll never be like something like this master's fucked up. It's always like the pillows. The pillows aren't in their right spot.
I get that, man. I was just reading through our community post the other day, and someone tagged me in something. They were talking about something positive about how they learned something, but they quoted what I said to them on the mentorship moment, and I was like, "Well," I wrote back. I was like, "Was that harsh?" Like,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
it was all for good, but like it's what I needed to hear. But sometimes
the studio
of that,
it's like I like tell like when they're like first starting, I'm like, this is like a food processing plant. Like pretty soon we're going to be in like hazmat suits, like, like Walter White in Breaking Bad with all our different beakers and flasks. It's getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. But no, I'm just joking. It is funny though, but that's the kind of like discipline that I'm like trying to instill in people. It never has anything to do with the actual work. It's all about the environment. It's really interesting, actually.
Wow.
The pillow's wrong. Like if that right pillow's wrong, it's going to ruin your left channel the whole rest of the day.
I love that so much. That's such a high level of geekiness and some sort of OCD neuroticism that's both beautiful and and wonderful at the same time.
The last thing I'll tell you on this topic, Bob Levy, he's a guy who builds studio. He's built crazy studios up in Northern California. He told me that studios, if they don't look right, they don't sound right. And I've like latched onto that so hard. And I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. Because usually there's like some symmetry in, you know, in the sound and the sonics.
Now I'm looking around paranoid.
If it doesn't look right, it doesn't sound right. Yeah, I mean, he's right too. Like sometimes like it is very much about like you look at something and it's like, well, it's off. Like the sound's going to be off too.
Yeah. I used to have a ton of gear in my room. And as I've moved towards more digital, I've gotten rid of everything. I find my room just emptier and emptier over time. So it's just like, I even want a smaller desk. I just want like a tiny desk, my nice speakers, and like nothing else in the room except my treatment, and just have everything dialed in.
Yep.
But it's cool.
The Bobcats model, nothing in the way of the speakers.
He's one of the best.
Yep.
He is indeed. Dep, wonderful talking to you. Much love for everything that you've been saying. Really appreciate the candid nature, and just thanks for being one of the good guys in this industry. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Wishing you great success in upcoming. Hope there's a lot more we can do together in the future, and really excited to have you come and work with our community over the next month. And yeah, just been really wonderful talking to you, man.
Thanks, Caleb. You too, man.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Reverse Engineer Podcast. And if you do have any more questions about our renowned education platform for engineers and producers, just go to mastering.com. We have a lot of great information there. We can answer all of your questions. And if you did like this episode of the podcast, please give us a like, give us a review, tell your friends. We really appreciate the support. Thanks for now. We'll see you on the next one.